I watched my father hand my brother the deed to our family home, the investment portfolios, everything. 5 years I had sacrificed for them. 5 years while Ben lived in California chasing dreams. He had been back exactly 4 weeks. I quietly placed the power of attorney documents and house keys on the coffee table. "Congratulations, Ben," I said, my voice steady despite the fire burning in my chest. Mom smiled warmly at him. "He deserves it." I left a sealed envelope on Dad's desk before walking out. When he opened it 2 hours later, I heard his voice echo through the neighborhood. "You're joking." The pounding on my apartment door came at 11:30 that night. I knew it was Ben before I opened it. His face was red, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his expensive suit wrinkled from the party. "What the hell do you think you're playing at, William?" he demanded, pushing past me into my cramped living room. "Whatever was in that letter, whatever sick game this is, it ends now." I closed the door slowly, studying my younger brother. Even angry, he looked like success. The California tan, the designer clothes, the confidence that came from never having to change an adult diaper or count pills into weekly organizers. I had forgotten what that kind of freedom felt like. "No game, Ben, just the truth. 5 years ago, when Dad had his first stroke, I was 32 and finally seeing my architectural firm take off. I had 3 major contracts lined up, a team of talented designers, and Sarah, the woman I thought I would marry. Then came that phone call from Mom, her voice shaking as she described finding Dad collapsed in the garden, the ambulance, the hospital words like significant brain damage and long recovery. I drove the 8 hours home that same night. Ben, of course, was between projects in Los Angeles and couldn't get away right now. He promised to visit soon. Soon turned into months, months into years. The first year was the hardest. Dad could barely speak, his right side completely paralyzed. Mom tried to help, but she was already showing early signs of the dementia that would gradually steal her memory. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, sleeping on the narrow twin bed surrounded by my high school soccer trophies and college pennants. Every morning started at 6. Check Dad's blood pressure, insulin shot, morning medications sorted into the plastic organizer I bought at the pharmacy. Help him to the bathroom, assist with his shower, dress him in the tracksuits that had replaced his business attire. Mom needed reminding about her own pills, help finding things she had misplaced, gentle redirection when she forgot what year it was. Physical therapy sessions 3 times a week, occupational therapy twice a week, doctor appointments every other week, speech therapy that made Dad so frustrated he would cry. I learned to speak insurance language, to fight with Medicare representatives, to research every treatment option and medication side effect. My business withered. Clients couldn't wait for an architect who disappeared for weeks at a time. My team found other opportunities. Sarah lasted 2 years before she sat me down in the hospital cafeteria during one of Dad's stays and explained that she needed more from a relationship. I watched her drive away and realized I felt nothing but relief. One less person to disappoint. The financial strain was brutal. Dad's insurance covered some things, but not the wheelchair ramp I built, not the stair lift I installed, not the monitoring system for Mom's nighttime wandering. I spent my savings on home modifications, specialized equipment, and the gap between insurance coverage and actual costs. When Mom broke her hip falling in the bathroom, I took out a loan against my condo to pay for her surgery. Ben called every few weeks, sometimes monthly. Always apologetic, always promising to visit soon, always with some new project or audition or opportunity that prevented him from coming home. I stopped mentioning how tired I was, how isolated I felt, how much I needed help. He had his own life to live. Neighbors like Mrs. Patterson next door would see me loading Dad into the van for appointments and shake their heads sympathetically. "You're such a good son, William. Where's your brother these days?" I developed a standard response. "Hess busy with work in California." It was easier than explaining that Ben had essentially vanished from our lives while maintaining just enough contact to avoid looking like a complete abandonment. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends from college stopped calling when I couldn't join them for anything spontaneous. Dating was impossible when your idea of a free evening was watching Netflix with your parents while monitoring mom for signs of confusion. I lived in a world of medical appointments and insurance paperwork and the slow, grinding routine of caregiving. There were moments when I hated Ben with the intensity that scared me. When Dad would mention missing him, when Mom would ask when he was coming home, when I found old family photos of Ben receiving awards and scholarships while I stood in the background. The golden boy, the achiever, the one who had escaped. But I stayed. Through Dad's second stroke, smaller but more frightening because it showed his condition was degenerative. Through Mom's diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's and the terrible process of watching her forget our shared memories. Through the crushing realization that this was my life now, permanently. Last year, things finally stabilized. Dad's condition plateaued at a manageable level. Mom's dementia progressed slowly with medication. I started taking on small architectural projects again, working from home while they napped. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe there was light at the end of the tunnel. Then, 3 weeks ago, Dad announced he wanted to have a family meeting about estate planning and the future. I assumed it meant finally formalizing the care arrangements, maybe setting up a trust to ensure their medical needs would be met. I thought about suggesting Ben contribute financially since he couldn't contribute physically. Ben arrived 4 weeks ago with no warning. Rental BMW in the driveway, suitcase full of expensive clothes, talking about finally being in a position to help the family. Within days, it was like I had never existed. Mom laughed at his stories about Hollywood parties. Dad beamed with pride at Ben's tales of success and networking. They hung on his every word while I continued the invisible work of managing their medications and appointments. You have no idea what I've been through. I told Ben now, watching him pace around my tiny apartment, what I've given up. That was your choice, William. Nobody forced you to put your life on hold. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Your choice. As if watching your parents suffer was optional. As if love was a decision you could opt out of when it became inconvenient. Where were you when Dad couldn't remember my name for 3 months? Where were you when Mom got lost walking to the grocery store and the police found her 2 miles away, crying? Where were you during the 48 hours when we thought Dad might not wake up from his second stroke? Ben stopped pacing. For just a moment, his perfect facade cracked, and I saw something that might have been guilt. I was building a career, William. I was thinking about the future, about how I could eventually help them better than just changing bedpans and playing nurse. And how exactly did that work out for you? He turned away, looking out my window at the parking lot. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. What was in that letter? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The truth about your grand return, Ben, and why you really came home after all these years. Ben's arrival 4 weeks earlier had been perfectly orchestrated. I was helping Dad with his afternoon medications when the BMW pulled into the driveway. Ben emerged like a movie star, designer sunglasses, perfect smile, carrying expensive luggage and gift bags from stores I couldn't afford to browse in. Surprise, he announced, sweeping Mom into a hug that lifted her off the ground. She squealed with delight, immediately calling for Dad, who struggled to the front window with his walker to see what the commotion was about. The transformation was immediate and devastating. Within minutes, our quiet house became a celebration. Ben distributed gifts, silk scarves for Mom, a vintage whiskey for Dad, expensive chocolates, books about California wine country. He regaled them with stories about meetings with producers, lunches in Beverly Hills, apartment hunting in Manhattan Beach. I stood in the hallway holding Dad's pill organizer, suddenly feeling like hired help in my own home. Ben had always possessed this gift for commanding attention. In high school, he was student body president, quarterback of the football team, prom king. In college, he double majored in business and theater, graduated summa cum laude, had job offers waiting. I was the steady one, the responsible one, the one who studied hard and made decent grades, and never quite shone as brightly. During his first week home, I tried to be generous. I showed him Dad's medication schedule, explained Mom's good and bad days, walked him through the equipment and safety features I had installed. He listened politely but seemed more interested in entertaining our parents than learning the practical details of their care. "You've done an amazing job, William," he said one evening as I prepared their nighttime medications. "But maybe it's time to consider other options. Professional help. They shouldn't have to depend on you for everything." The comment stung, but I pushed down my irritation. "They're not depending on me. This is what families do." "Is it though? Look at yourself, man. When's the last time you went on a date, took a vacation, had a life outside this house?" I wanted to explain that this was my life, that caring for them had become meaningful in ways I couldn't articulate, that despite the hardship, I had found purpose in service. Instead, I just shrugged. "I'm fine." Ben's girlfriend Jessica arrived during his second week home. She was everything I expected. Blonde, beautiful, probably 10 years younger than Ben, with the kind of effortless style that came from having never worried about money. Mom was instantly smitten, spending hours showing Jessica photo albums and talking about fashion trends. "Your brother is incredible," Jessica told me one afternoon while Ben was out running errands with Dad. "Has told me so much about how grateful he is for everything you've done. He really wants to step up now, you know? Take some of the burden off your shoulders." The word burden rankled, but Jessica seemed sincere. Maybe Ben had genuinely matured, genuinely wanted to help. That illusion shattered when I started noticing his phone calls. Ben had always been a phone person, conducting business conversations in animated tones that carried throughout the house. But these calls were different. Hushed conversations in the backyard, quick trips to his rental car to take certain calls privately, meetings that required him to be gone for hours without clear explanations about where he had been. "Just handling some business stuff," he would say when I asked. "Trying to wrap up some projects so I can focus on family." I began paying attention to the fragments I could overhear, references to property values and market assessments and timeline for transition. Business cards, appearing in Dad's wallet from real estate agents and elder care attorneys. Brochures for assisted living facilities tucked into magazines around the house. One afternoon, I discovered a notepad by the phone with Ben's handwriting. "Sunset Manor, tour Thursday 2 p.m., and financial advisor, asset liquidation options." When I confronted him, Ben didn't deny it. "Look, William, I know this is hard to hear, but Mom and Dad need professional care. You can't do this forever, and frankly, you shouldn't have to. There are excellent facilities that specialize in their conditions. They'd have 24-hour medical staff, activities, social interaction with people their own age. They don't want to leave their home. Have you asked them? Really asked them? Or have you just assumed they want to stay here because it's convenient for you?" The accusation hit like a slap. "Convenient? You think any of this has been convenient? I think you've built your identity around being their caregiver, and now you can't imagine any other way to matter to them." His words followed me for days. Was I holding them back? Had my devotion become a form of selfishness? I watched Mom struggle to remember my name some mornings. Saw Dad's frustration when his words wouldn't come out right. Wondered if professional care really would be better. But then I would help Dad with his crossword puzzles and see his face light up when he remembered a 7-letter word. Or I would find Mom in the garden, humming while she watered the flowers she had planted 40 years ago. They were still themselves in this house, still connected to their history and memories. A facility would give them safety, but would it give them home? Ben's campaign intensified during his 3rd week. He arranged for a physical therapist to evaluate Dad, an occupational therapist to assess the house for safety issues, a social worker to discuss care options. Each professional delivered the same message. While the current situation was admirable, it wasn't sustainable long-term. "Your brother has sacrificed tremendously," the social worker told our parents, "but he's still a young man with his own life to live. There are excellent residential options that would ensure your safety while allowing your family relationships to remain strong." I realized Ben had coached them all, provided talking points that made him sound reasonable, and me sound like an obstacle to their well-being. The inheritance party was Ben's idea. A celebration of family unity and future planning, he called it. He invited extended family, longtime neighbors, family friends who hadn't seen our parents in years. It felt like a farewell gathering, though no one said that explicitly. On the morning of the party, I found Ben in Dad's office, going through financial documents with the same focused intensity he had once applied to football playbooks. "Making sure I understand their situation," he explained, without looking up. "If I'm going to be responsible for their care, I need to know what resources are available." But the papers scattered across the desk weren't medical records or insurance policies. They were investment statements, property deeds, retirement account summaries. Ben was cataloging assets, not care needs. That's when I knew for certain that his concern for our parents' well-being was secondary to his interest in their wealth. That evening, as relatives and friends gathered in our living room, I made my own preparations. I had been documenting everything for weeks. Ben's mysterious phone calls, his meetings with real estate agents, his gradual positioning of himself as the responsible son who would make the hard decisions William couldn't face. I wrote the letter that afternoon, sitting in the same office where Ben had been calculating our parents' net worth. It contained information I had discovered through careful investigation, evidence that would expose the real reason for Ben's sudden return and enthusiastic involvement in our parents' future. When Dad announced that Ben would inherit everything, I felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. Ben's charming return, his concern for professional care, his timeline for transition, it had all been building to this moment. I set down the power of attorney documents and house keys with genuine calm. Ben could have the house, the investments, the responsibility he claimed to want, but he would also have to deal with the consequences of what I had discovered about his real motivations. The letter would ensure that. "William, you understand this is what's best for everyone, right?" Ben asked as I prepared to leave, his voice carrying just enough concern to sound caring to the assembled witnesses. "Absolutely, Ben. You've certainly earned it." I left the letter on Dad's desk and walked out of the house where I had spent 5 years, rebuilding myself into someone capable of sacrifice, service, and love. Whatever happened next, I had done everything I could to protect the people who mattered most. Now Ben would learn what it really cost to be the golden boy. The inheritance party felt surreal from the moment guests began arriving. Uncle Robert drove down from Portland with his wife Nancy, both of them clearly uncomfortable with the formal nature of what they had expected to be a casual family gathering. Cousin Mike and his teenage kids appeared overdressed and uncertain, clutching gift bags and looking around for guidance about the appropriate tone for an inheritance announcement. Mrs. Patterson from next door accepted her invitation with genuine pleasure, having watched our family dynamics unfold for years. She arrived with a casserole and knowing eyes that seemed to take in everything. Several longtime family friends appeared: the Kowalskis from Dad's bowling league, the Hendersons who had been neighbors before we moved to this house, Dr. Martinez who had treated Dad before his strokes. I watched Ben work the room like the natural politician he had always been. He embraced uncles, complimented aunts on their outfits, remembered details about cousins, jobs, and children's accomplishments. Jessica hovered nearby, perfectly styled in a dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Mom beamed as she introduced Jessica to everyone as Ben's girlfriend from California. Dad struggled with his words more than usual, the excitement and crowd clearly overwhelming him, but his pride in Ben was unmistakable. Every conversation seemed to revolve around Ben's success, his plans for the family, his maturity and readiness for responsibility. I circulated quietly, refilling drinks and collecting appetizer plates, falling into the servant role that had become natural after years of caregiving. People asked polite questions about my architectural work, but their attention inevitably shifted back to Ben's more glamorous stories about life in Los Angeles. William's been absolutely devoted. I heard Mom tell Aunt Nancy, but Ben has such a head for business, and he understands the bigger picture about what's best for us long term. The casual dismissal of my 5 years of devotion stung, but I had expected it. Ben's charm offensive had been thorough and effective. Our parents genuinely believed that his concern for their future was motivated purely by love, not by the financial inheritance he was about to receive. When Dad stood up to make his announcement, the room fell silent. His speech was halting due to his stroke-related difficulties, but his message was clear and decisive. Ben will inherit the house and all our assets. he declared, his words carefully rehearsed. Has shown us that he has the wisdom and success to honor our legacy and take care of our future needs. The applause was enthusiastic, but awkward. Uncle Robert caught my eye with a questioning look that I pretended not to notice. Mrs. Patterson's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see disapproval in the tight line of her mouth. Ben's acceptance speech was masterful. He talked about family responsibility, honoring traditions, ensuring our parents could live with dignity and security for the rest of their lives. He acknowledged my years of service with exactly the right tone of gratitude and respect, positioning my caregiving as a temporary bridge until he could return to take permanent responsibility. William has been incredible, he said, looking directly at me with what appeared to be genuine emotion. He held everything together when I couldn't be here. Now it's time for me to step up and carry this forward. More applause. Jessica wiped away a tear. Mom reached over and squeezed Ben's hand, while Dad nodded approvingly. I waited until the formal moment was complete, then quietly placed the power of attorney documents and house keys on the coffee table where everyone could see them. The gesture was deliberately symbolic. William abdicating responsibility, Ben assuming control, the transition complete and witnessed. "Congratulations, Ben," I said clearly enough for the entire room to hear. "I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job." The words carried no trace of sarcasm or bitterness. If anything, I sounded relieved, grateful to finally pass the burden to someone more qualified. Several people nodded approvingly at my grace under difficult circumstances, but I had positioned myself near the window, and through the glass I could see Ben's rental BMW parked next to Dad's sedan. Earlier that afternoon, while Ben was showering and our parents were napping, I had installed a small recording device under the dashboard of Ben's car. What I captured during his private phone conversation with Jessica changed everything I thought I knew about his motivations. The party went perfectly. Ben had told Jessica as they sat in his car after the announcement. Dad signed everything over without a single question. William handled it better than I expected, actually seemed relieved to hand over the responsibility. "How long before we can move forward with the sale?" Jessica had asked. "Real estate agent thinks 60 days maximum. The market's hot for properties in this neighborhood, especially with the size lot. Probably get 400,000, maybe more." "What about your parents?" "Sunset Manor has availability starting next month. I already put down the deposit. They'll be comfortable there, and the monthly fees are way less than maintaining this place. Well, actually come out ahead financially. And William doesn't suspect anything. William's been playing house here for 5 years. He has no idea what real estate is worth, no understanding of investment markets. He thinks I came back because I suddenly developed a conscience." Their laughter had been audible even through the recording device. "Once we get them settled in the facility and liquidate the assets, we can pay off my debts and still have enough left to get serious about that production company idea. You're sure they'll agree to move? They're not going to have a choice. He'll have power of attorney by tomorrow. Medical professionals have already recommended facility care. William's been running himself into the ground trying to manage their needs. Everyone expects me to make the responsible decision." The recording captured 23 minutes of detailed planning. Ben had orchestrated every aspect of his return, the timing to arrive after Dad's health had stabilized, the systematic cultivation of our parents' affection, the careful positioning of facility care as the logical next step, even the inheritance party to create public witnesses to his assumption of responsibility. What he hadn't expected was William doing homework of his own. During my weeks of growing suspicion about Ben's motivations, I had conducted my own investigation into his recent history. Phone calls to mutual friends revealed that Ben's acting career had been largely fictional. His most recent job was selling timeshares in Scottsdale, a position he had lost 6 months earlier due to performance issues. The expensive clothes and rental BMW were funded by credit cards and personal loans. Jessica wasn't a successful California professional, but a cocktail waitress from Phoenix who was as financially desperate as Ben. More disturbingly, I had discovered through careful examination of Dad's monthly bank statements that money had been disappearing from his accounts for the past 3 months. Small amounts, transferred in ways that wouldn't immediately attract attention, but totaling nearly $50,000. Ben hadn't come home to help our parents. He had come home to exploit them. The letter I left on Dad's desk contained copies of bank records, credit reports I had obtained through legitimate channels, and a timeline showing the correlation between Ben's financial desperation and his sudden family devotion. It also included transcripts of the recorded conversations between Ben and Jessica, complete with timestamps and audio file references. I had debated for weeks whether to expose Ben before or after the inheritance decision. Ultimately, I chose to let Dad make his choice based on the illusion Ben had created. The truth would be more powerful as a contrast to the lies. As I walked out of the house that evening, I felt genuinely at peace for the first time in months. Whatever happened next, I had protected our parents from a sophisticated con job designed to exploit their love, their trust, and their vulnerability. Ben could enjoy his inheritance for exactly as long as it took Dad to read my letter. Dad found my letter at 9:45 that evening, after the last guests had left and Mom was loading the dishwasher with Jessica's help. Ben was outside smoking a cigarette and making phone calls, probably coordinating the next steps in his carefully planned timeline. I wasn't there to witness Dad's reaction, but Mrs. Patterson called me 20 minutes later to describe the explosion that shook the neighborhood. "Your father's voice carried 3 houses down," she told me, her own voice shaking with excitement and concern. "He was screaming something about bank records and theft. I saw Ben come running inside, and then there was more shouting. Police cars showed up about an hour ago. I drove back to the house to find 2 patrol cars in the driveway, and Detective Barnes from the Financial Crimes Unit taking statements in the living room. Dad was slumped in his recliner, looking pale and exhausted, while Mom sat beside him holding his hand and staring at Ben with undisguised horror. Ben stood near the fireplace, still wearing his party clothes but looking like a different person entirely. The confident charm had evaporated, replaced by the desperate energy of someone whose carefully constructed facade had just collapsed. "William." Detective Barnes greeted me as I entered. "Your father asked us to call you. We're going to need to talk to you about the evidence you compiled." The letter I had written was brief but comprehensive. "Dad, by the time you read this, you'll have made your choice about the inheritance. But you should know the truth about your golden boy before he gains control of your finances and your future. Ben has been stealing from your bank account for 3 months. The enclosed copies of your statements show unauthorized transfers totaling $49,800. The bank confirmed these transactions were made using forged signatures and unauthorized access to your personal information. Ben's successful life in California is entirely fictional. He lost his job selling timeshares 6 months ago and owes approximately $70,000 in gambling debts to creditors in Phoenix and Las Vegas. His girlfriend Jessica is unemployed and facing bankruptcy. They came here not to help you, but to exploit you. The assisted living facility he's been researching costs $8,000 per month. Your house is worth approximately $400,000 in the current market. His plan is to sell your home, place you in institutional care, and pocket the difference to pay his debts and fund his next scheme. I have reported the theft to the bank and provided them with evidence of fraud. I have also documented his conversations planning to exploit your trust and manipulate your medical care decisions for financial gain. The choice is yours. Face the truth about Ben or continue living in the fantasy he created. Either way, I won't be part of watching him destroy everything you've worked for. The police have copies of everything. Detective Barnes at the Financial Crimes Unit is expecting your call." William Dad's reaction had been immediate and physical. Chest pains, difficulty breathing, the terrifying possibility of another stroke brought on by shock and betrayal. Mom had called 911 before reading the letter herself, and her own reaction had been equally devastating. "Is this true?" she kept asking Ben, her voice breaking. "Did you really steal from us? Did you really lie about everything?" Ben's initial response had been denial and deflection. "William's jealous. He's been resentful about the inheritance. He fabricated this stuff to get back at me." But when Detective Barnes began reading him bank transaction details and times that correlated exactly with Ben's presence in the house, his story began falling apart. "Look, there were some temporary loans," Ben finally admitted. I was planning to pay everything back once I got settled here. I never meant to hurt anyone. Temporary loans. Dad's voice was barely audible, but his fury was unmistakable. You forged my signature. You stole from us while we trusted you, while we welcomed you back into our home. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of Ben's desperation. The gambling debts were real and involved dangerous creditors who had been pressuring him for months. His entire life in California had been a house of cards built on credit, fraud, and dishonest schemes. More devastating were the recorded conversations I had captured between Ben and Jessica. Detective Barnes played portions of the audio for our parents, including Ben's casual dismissal of William's years of service and his detailed plans for liquidating their assets. They'll be comfortable at Sunset Manor, and the monthly fees are way less than maintaining this place. Well, actually come out ahead financially. Mom started crying when she heard that. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but harsh, painful sobs that seemed to come from deep in her chest. How could you? She asked Ben. How could you let us believe you cared about us when all you wanted was our money? Ben tried to maintain his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. He claimed the conversations were taken out of context, that his concern for their welfare was genuine, that William had manipulated the investigation to make him look guilty. But the bank records were undeniable. The pattern of theft was clear and systematic. The timing of his return home correlated exactly with his mounting debts and financial desperation. Detective Barnes arrested Ben that night on charges of elder financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me with genuine hatred. You destroyed this family, William. They'll never forgive you for turning them against their own son. I watched the police car disappear down our street and felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion and sadness. I had protected our parents from exploitation, but the cost was the complete destruction of their faith in Ben and their understanding of family loyalty. Dad spent the next 3 hours with his attorney, revoking the inheritance documents he had signed and beginning the process of pursuing criminal charges against Ben. Mom sat in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions about details that made Ben's betrayal even more painful. Did he ever love us at all? She asked me as I helped her get ready for bed. Or was everything just part of his plan to rob us? I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe Ben's affection for our parents was real, existing alongside his willingness to exploit them. Maybe he had convinced himself that his scheme was somehow in their best interests. Maybe desperation had corrupted whatever genuine love he felt. What mattered was that they were safe now. Ben's access to their finances was permanently revoked. The inheritance he had manipulated them into granting was nullified. The assisted living facility plans were canceled, but the emotional damage would take much longer to heal. Our parents had to confront the reality that their golden boy had returned home not out of love, but out of greed, that his charm and concern had been calculated performances designed to facilitate theft. As I drove home that night, I realized that exposing Ben's crimes was only the beginning. Now came the harder work of helping our parents rebuild their sense of trust and security after being betrayed by the son they had believed in most. The next 72 hours unfolded like a nightmare that kept getting worse. Dad's chest pains landed him back in the hospital for observation, and his doctors were genuinely concerned about the stress triggering another stroke. Mom's confusion increased dramatically. The shock of Ben's betrayal seemed to accelerate her cognitive decline in ways that terrified me. Detective Barnes called Tuesday morning with updates that made Ben's situation even more dire. The financial investigation had uncovered additional victims. An elderly couple in Phoenix whose son Ben had befriended and systematically robbed, a widow in Las Vegas who had lost her deceased husband's life insurance payout to Ben's investment opportunities. Your brother's been running family cons for at least 2 years, Barnes explained. He targets aging parents through their adult children, builds trust over months, then exploits their medical vulnerabilities and financial assets. You probably saved your parents from losing everything. But Ben wasn't going quietly. From the county jail, he launched his own campaign of manipulation, calling relatives and family friends with his version of events. According to Ben, William had fabricated evidence out of jealousy and resentment. The bank transfers were legitimate loans that Ben had arranged with Dad's full knowledge. The recorded conversations were edited to sound incriminating. Several family members believed him. Cousin Mike called Dad directly to argue that families should handle these things privately and that pressing criminal charges against Ben was vindictive and destructive. Aunt Nancy drove down from Portland to confront me personally about tearing the family apart over money. Ben made mistakes, she told me as we sat in the hospital waiting room while Dad underwent more cardiac tests. But he's still your brother. You can't destroy his life over some financial misunderstanding. I showed her copies of the bank records, the forged signatures, the systematic pattern of theft over 3 months. She studied them with growing discomfort but maintained her position. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he handled things wrong, but his heart was in the right place. He came home to help, and you've made him look like a criminal. He is a criminal, Aunt Nancy. The evidence is overwhelming. Evidence you compiled while spying on him, recording private conversations, building a case like some kind of prosecutor. What does that say about you, William? What kind of person does that to his own brother? The accusation haunted me because it contained a grain of truth. I had methodically investigated Ben, documented his behavior, built a case against him with the thoroughness of someone who wanted him to fail. Had I been protecting our parents, or had I been seeking revenge for years of feeling overlooked and underappreciated? Ben's bail hearing revealed the full extent of his legal troubles. The gambling debts were connected to organized crime figures who had been pressuring Ben with increasingly serious threats. His desperate need for money had driven him to target our parents as a last resort to avoid physical harm. My client made serious errors in judgment, Ben's attorney argued, but he was acting under duress from creditors who threatened his safety. His return to the family home was motivated by genuine fear for his life, not by greed. The judge wasn't impressed. Ben's pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people made him a flight risk and a danger to potential future victims. Bail was set at $200,000, an amount Ben couldn't possibly raise. That evening, Jessica appeared at our house. She looked exhausted and desperate, her perfect appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and smeared makeup. "I need to talk to your parents," she told me at the front door. "They have to understand what really happened." Mom was napping, and Dad was still in the hospital, but I let Jessica into the living room. Her story was different from Ben's, but equally damaging. "Ben owes money to really dangerous people," she explained. "They found his car last month in Phoenix and left a dead cat on the windshield with a note about what happens to people who don't pay their debts. He was terrified, William. Coming home wasn't about greed, it was about survival. So he decided to rob our parents to save himself. He convinced himself it was temporary, that once he got their house sold and them settled somewhere safe, he could pay back the loan and tell them the truth. He thought he was protecting them from the danger he was in." Jessica's version painted Ben as a victim of circumstances rather than a calculating predator, but it didn't change the fundamental facts. He had stolen from our parents, lied to them systematically, and planned to exploit their medical vulnerabilities for financial gain. "Will you testify for him?" she asked as she prepared to leave. "Tell the court about how much pressure he was under, how much he loves your parents despite everything." I thought about 5 years of missing birthdays, unanswered phone calls, promises to visit that never materialized. I thought about Ben's dismissive attitude toward my caregiving, his casual assumption that everything I had sacrificed was my choice. I thought about his laughter in the car as he described manipulating our parents' trust. "No," I told Jessica. "I won't testify for him." The preliminary hearing 3 weeks later was devastating for our entire family. Ben appeared in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles, looking nothing like the golden boy who had arrived home with gifts and stories about Hollywood success. The prosecutor presented a methodical case. Bank records showing systematic theft, audio recordings revealing calculated deception, testimony from other victims describing identical patterns of exploitation. Ben's scheme was sophisticated, patient, and designed specifically to target elderly people's vulnerabilities. Ben's attorney tried to humanize him, describing his gambling addiction as a disease, his debts as the result of mental illness, his targeting of family as desperation rather than calculation. Several character witnesses testified about Ben's charm, intelligence, and potential for rehabilitation. But when Mom took the stand as a victim witness, her testimony destroyed any sympathy Ben might have generated. "He held my hand and told me he loved me," she said, her voice barely audible through tears. "He said he was sorry for being away so long, that he wanted to take care of us in our old age. And while he was saying those things, he was stealing from us. While I was showing him pictures of his childhood, he was planning to put us in a facility and sell our home." The judge found probable cause for all charges and scheduled Ben's trial for 6 months later. As court security led him away, Ben turned to look at our family in the gallery. His eyes found mine. And for just a moment, I saw the little brother I had grown up with, instead of the stranger who had tried to destroy our parents' security. That night, Dad suffered his third stroke. Dad's third stroke was mild compared to his previous ones, but it occurred at the worst possible time psychologically. The stress of Ben's betrayal, combined with the exhaustion of legal proceedings and family conflict, had pushed his cardiovascular system beyond its limits. I spent 4 days in the hospital with him while doctors stabilized his condition and adjusted his medications. Mom's confusion worsened with Dad hospitalized. She kept asking where Ben was and why he hadn't come to visit. Explaining the situation repeatedly was heartbreaking for both of us. But during those long hospital hours, I had time to think strategically about our family's future and Ben's attempt to exploit it. The criminal case would proceed regardless of my involvement, but I realized there were additional legal protections our parents needed that went beyond prosecuting Ben for theft. I contacted Margaret Chen, an elder law attorney who specialized in protecting vulnerable adults from financial abuse. What she told me about Ben's legal sophistication was chilling. "Your brother researched this very carefully," Margaret explained after reviewing all the evidence. "The power of attorney documents he prepared would have given him complete control over your parents' medical and financial decisions. Once he had legal authority, he could have moved them to a facility against their will, sold their property without their consent, and managed their assets with very little oversight. Ben's scheme wasn't just theft. It was systematic elder abuse designed to strip our parents of their autonomy and independence. If I hadn't intervened, they would have found themselves trapped in an expensive care facility while Ben liquidated everything they owned." Margaret helped me file a comprehensive legal action that went far beyond the criminal charges Ben already faced. We petitioned for a restraining order preventing Ben from any contact with our parents, requested asset recovery for the money he had stolen, and sought punitive damages for elder abuse and intentional infliction of emotional distress. More importantly, Margaret connected me with Adult Protective Services to document the full scope of Ben's exploitation attempt. The APS investigation revealed details about Ben's planning that even I hadn't discovered. Ben had researched our parents' medical conditions extensively, consulting with healthcare professionals about the progression of Dad's stroke damage and Mom's dementia. He had specifically timed his return to coincide with the period when their conditions were stable but their cognitive judgment might be impaired. The Sunset Manor facility Ben had chosen was neither the highest quality option available nor the most cost-effective. It was the facility that paid referral fees to people who brought them new residents. Ben would have received a commission for placing our parents there, profiting from their institutionalization while claiming to act in their best interests. Jessica became a crucial witness when Margaret's investigation revealed her own financial desperation. Facing bankruptcy and threatened with eviction, Jessica had been as desperate as Ben to find money quickly. In exchange for immunity from prosecution, she provided detailed testimony about their planning and preparation. "Ben studied your family for months before coming home," she testified in a deposition. "He knew about your architectural business, your financial situation, your relationship history. He researched your parents' property values, their investment accounts, even their insurance policies. This wasn't impulse or desperation. This was a carefully planned operation." The most damaging evidence came from Ben's own communications. His cell phone records showed extensive research into elder abuse techniques, legal loopholes for power of attorney manipulation, and strategies for isolating elderly people from family members who might interfere with exploitation plans. Margaret discovered that Ben had contacted at least 6 different assisted living facilities. Comparing costs, and specifically asking about policies for residents whose children held power of attorney. He had been comparison shopping for the most profitable way to warehouse our parents. During this investigation, I also learned disturbing details about Ben's previous victims. The elderly couple in Phoenix had lost their home, their savings, and their independence before their daughter discovered the fraud. The widow in Las Vegas had attempted suicide after realizing Ben had stolen her husband's life insurance money. "Your brother is a serial predator," Detective Barnes told me during one of our meetings. "He specifically targets families with aging parents and adult children who might be vulnerable to manipulation. You stopping him probably saved other families from going through what you've experienced." Ben's trial was delayed when his attorney requested psychiatric evaluation to determine his competency. The evaluation revealed gambling addiction, antisocial personality traits, and a sophisticated understanding of elder abuse techniques that suggested long-term planning rather than impulsive desperation. But the most shocking discovery came when Margaret's asset investigation uncovered Ben's financial history over the past 5 years. The acting career in California had been completely fictional. Ben had been working various scams and cons across the Southwest, targeting vulnerable people and moving frequently to avoid prosecution. The expensive clothes, the rental BMW, even Jessica herself, were all props in an elaborate performance designed to convince our parents that Ben was successful and trustworthy enough to manage their affairs. During the civil proceedings, I testified about the years of manipulation and emotional abuse our parents had endured. But I also testified about Ben's intelligence, his understanding of their medical conditions, and his calculated exploitation of their love and trust. He knew exactly how to make them feel guilty for depending on me. I told the court. He positioned professional care as a gift to me, freedom from the burden of caregiving, when he was actually planning to profit from their institutionalization. The civil case revealed Ben's exploitation plan in comprehensive detail. Margaret presented evidence showing every step of his scheme: the research phase, the relationship building, the systematic undermining of my credibility, the manipulation of medical recommendations, even backup plans in case I discovered his activities earlier than expected. Ben had prepared multiple scenarios for different contingencies. If I had become suspicious during his first week home, he had strategies for portraying me as unstable and overprotective. If our parents had resisted the assisted living option, he had backup facilities and alternative manipulation techniques. The depth of his preparation was staggering and terrifying. Ben hadn't impulsively decided to exploit our parents. He had methodically researched and planned their exploitation with the thoroughness of a professional criminal. Judge Martinez awarded full restitution plus punitive damages totaling $150,000. More importantly, the court issued a permanent restraining order, preventing Ben from any contact with our parents, and established a legal record that would protect them from future exploitation attempts. Ben's criminal trial resulted in a plea agreement: 2 years in state prison, 5 years of probation, and mandatory participation in addiction treatment programs. He would also be required to register as a financial predator and would be permanently barred from working in positions involving access to vulnerable adults. As Ben was led away to begin his prison sentence, he turned to face our family one final time. The anger and hatred were gone, replaced by something that might have been regret or genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," he said, looking directly at Mom and Dad. "I never meant for things to go this far. I wanted to believe him, but Margaret had taught me that predators often expressed remorse when caught, not because they were genuinely sorry, but because they understood that contrition might reduce their punishment. What mattered was that our parents were safe, legally protected, and financially secure." Ben's attempt to exploit their trust and vulnerability had failed completely. Now came the harder work of helping them heal from the betrayal. 6 months after Ben began serving his prison sentence, our family had found a new equilibrium that none of us could have imagined during the chaos of his betrayal and prosecution. Dad's recovery from his third stroke was slower than his previous ones, but physical therapy was helping him regain strength and confidence. Mom's dementia progression had stabilized once the stress of Ben's situation resolved. More importantly, our relationships with each other had deepened in unexpected ways. Dad and I spent hours together working on model airplanes, a hobby he had abandoned after his first stroke but recently rediscovered. His fine motor skills were improving, and the focus required for detailed assembly work seemed to help with his speech therapy as well. "I owe you an apology, William," he told me one afternoon as we worked on a World War II fighter plane kit. "I let myself get fooled by Ben's charm. I forgot that real love isn't about grand gestures and exciting stories. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard." Mom's good days were more frequent now, and during those times, she expressed genuine appreciation for the years of care I had provided. She also grieved for Ben with a sadness that was healthy and necessary. "I still love him," she admitted during one of our garden walks. "He's still my son, and I hope prison helps him become the man I always believed he could be. But I'm grateful every day that you protected us from what he was planning to do." The legal resolution had been comprehensive and satisfying. Ben's restitution payments would continue throughout his probation period, ensuring that our parents recovered every penny he had stolen, plus additional compensation for the emotional trauma. The permanent restraining order meant he could never again have access to their finances or personal information. Margaret Chen had helped us establish robust legal protections that would prevent any future exploitation attempts. The new power of attorney documents required multiple signatures and independent verification for any major financial decisions. Our parents' assets were protected by trusts that no single person could manipulate. But the most meaningful resolution was personal rather than legal. My architectural business was thriving again. Word had spread about my situation, and several clients specifically sought me out because they respected my commitment to family responsibility. I had discovered that my experience as a caregiver had taught me patience, attention to detail, and problem-solving skills that made me a better architect. Sarah Chen, Margaret's law partner, had become a close friend during the legal proceedings, and recently something more than a friend. She understood the importance of family obligation and respected the choices I had made to care for our parents. Our relationship was developing slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect rather than convenience or desperation. Mrs. Patterson had become like a grandmother to all of us, checking in daily and providing the kind of community support that made independent living possible for aging parents. She often joined us for dinner, sharing stories about the neighborhood's history and serving as an unofficial advocate for our family's well-being. The most surprising development was communication from Ben himself. His first letter arrived 3 months into his sentence, written in the careful handwriting I remembered from childhood thank-you notes. It was neither defensive nor manipulative, but simply honest about his recognition of the damage he had caused. "I know I destroyed your trust and exploited the people who loved me most," he wrote. "I can't undo what I did, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that prison has given me time to understand how sick my thinking had become. I convinced myself that I was helping, that temporary theft was justified by desperate circumstances, that everyone would be better off with my management of their lives. I was wrong about everything." Subsequent letters described his participation in addiction treatment, his work with a therapist who specialized in antisocial behavior, and his growing understanding of the psychological damage caused by financial elder abuse. "I keep thinking about Mom crying when she heard the recordings of me laughing about manipulating their trust," he wrote in his most recent letter. "That sound will haunt me for the rest of my life. I don't know how to make amends for that level of betrayal, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of the family name." Dad read Ben's letters, but didn't respond. Mom wrote back occasionally, brief notes, expressing love while maintaining clear boundaries about what their relationship could be in the future. I found myself cautiously hopeful that Ben was experiencing genuine transformation, while remaining vigilant about protecting our parents from any possibility of repeated exploitation. The local newspaper had written a feature story about our situation, positioning it as a cautionary tale about elder abuse, while highlighting the importance of family vigilance and legal protection. Several families contacted me after reading the article, seeking advice about their own concerns regarding potential exploitation of aging relatives. Margaret suggested I consider speaking at community education events about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. The idea appealed to me as a way to honor the difficult experience our family had survived while helping others protect their loved ones. On a warm Sunday afternoon in late spring, our extended family gathered for what we now called our real inheritance party. Uncle Robert and Aunt Nancy drove down from Portland, this time to celebrate Dad's decision to establish the family trust that would ensure our parents' security and provide for their future care needs. The atmosphere was completely different from Ben's manipulative celebration. This gathering was quiet, genuine, focused on practical planning rather than grand gestures. Dad's attorney explained the trust provisions, the safeguards against exploitation, and the long-term care planning that would preserve our parents' autonomy while ensuring their needs were met. William will serve as primary trustee, Dad announced, with Robert as backup and Margaret as legal oversight. No single person will ever again have complete control over our assets or our care decisions. The trust also included provisions for Ben's potential rehabilitation and reintegration into family relationships, but with permanent safeguards that would prevent him from ever again having access to financial manipulation opportunities. As the afternoon wound down and relatives prepared to drive home, I found myself standing in the backyard garden where Mom continued to tend the flowers she had planted 40 years earlier. Dad was napping in his chair, exhausted but content after the day's activities. Mrs. Patterson was helping Mom deadhead roses and discussing plans for fall planting. This was the inheritance that truly mattered. Not money or property, but the relationships, trust, and love that define family bonds. Ben's betrayal had threatened to destroy those connections, but ultimately it had strengthened them by forcing us to distinguish between genuine devotion and manipulative performance. I thought about the man I had become during 5 years of caregiving. More patient, more resilient, more capable of sacrifice and service than I had ever imagined possible. Those qualities hadn't been burdens to endure, but gifts to develop, skills that enriched every aspect of my life. The real inheritance wasn't what our parents could give to us, but what we could give to each other. Protection, care, loyalty, and love that persisted through betrayal and emerged stronger on the other side. As I watched Mom and Mrs. Patterson discuss which varieties of tulips to plant for next spring's garden, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not dramatic confrontations or satisfying revenge, but quiet Sunday afternoons filled with people who had chosen to show up for each other, consistently and without reservation. Ben's letters suggested he might be learning similar lessons about the difference between manipulation and genuine love, between taking and giving, between exploiting trust and earning it. Whether his transformation was real remained to be seen, but our family's recovery was complete and enduring. The golden boy had fallen, but the family he tried to exploit had risen stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between protecting someone you love and maintaining family harmony? How do you balance loyalty with accountability when someone's actions threaten the people who matter most to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking and sharing it with others who might benefit from understanding the warning signs of elder abuse. Your support helps spread awareness about these important issues. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family resilience, standing up for what's right, and finding strength through difficult circumstances. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and I wish you the courage to protect the people you love, even when it's hardest to do so.